archives. And many of those documents have been about the penal system, about what you call the Gulag. And we have a much more accurate, detailed understanding of the Gulag today than before the end of the Soviet Union. I myself have not made a special study of it, but some years ago in Russia, there was I believe it's a 7-volume series, each of these volumes being many hundreds of pages long, just of documents about what you call the Gulag, the Soviet penal system. We know a tremendous amount about this.
Okay.
I think you asked me who was in it. People who had been convicted of crimes were in it. Mainly ordinary criminals. Sometimes people talk about political prisoners in the Soviet Union. I think that that's mainly inaccurate. People were not imprisoned, were not convicted, were not charged with political crimes. They were charged with criminal offenses. When people say political crimes, usually what they have in mind is the fact that after Stalin's death, and especially after Khrushchev became the leader of the Soviet Union, many people who had been convicted of crimes, some of them had been executed, were rehabilitated. That was the word the Soviets used. But as I have pointed out in some of my writings, you study the rehabilitation documents. They do not prove that these people were innocent. Okay? So Khrushchev had a program, and then Gorbachev continued that program, rehabilitating people who had been convicted of crimes and either executed or imprisoned, and it was taken for granted by many people. It was intended to deceive, and be taken for granted by many people that therefore these people were innocent. But in fact, we have quite a number of the rehabilitation studies that were done under Khrushchev, and it's very clear that they don't present any evidence that these people were innocent. So the notion, the idea of the Soviet penal system has been constructed by, of course, the post-Stalin Soviet leaders like Khrushchev and Gorbachev, and also by the anti-communist writers like Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And it's quite false. That portrayal of the Soviet penal system is quite inaccurate.
Okay. So now let's talk about Stalin.
Sure.
And can you tell us why Stalin wasn't a dictator?
Why he wasn't a dictator? Is that what you said? Sure. Well, so what's a dictator? If you look up the word dictator, at least in the major English language dictionaries, you'll read things like a person whose word is law, a person a ruler who has all the power in his hands. That's the dictionary definition. Someone who can make the decisions in a country, all by himself. By that definition, Hitler and Mussolini could be described as dictators. Stalin could not be described as a dictator. He always worked collectively with the other leaders of the party, and then later on, when he entered the government, with other leaders of the government. There are many examples of instances where Stalin did not get what he wanted, where he had proposals that were not accepted. And you can't find that you can't find that to be true, so far as I understand, with Adolf Hitler. So by the normal understanding of what a dictator is, Stalin was not a dictator.
Thank you. Yes, so he shared power with other people. He made decision collectively, like you said. So now we are going to talk about Holodomor. Recently, Europe, the European Union, sorry, adopts uh, a position about Holodomor and decided to consider this period as a genocide committed by Stalin. Some communists who were elected vote to recognize the Holodomor as a genocide. So there is a lot of revisionism in France, a lot of false communists, if I can said like. Can you tell us a little about Holodomor?
Well, there was no Holodomor. It's very simple. It didn't exist. There was a famine, but that's not what Holodomor means. Holodomor was a term invented by the Ukrainian nationalists who sided with the Nazis. And they invented the notion, which is quite false, that the famine of 1932-33 was deliberately created by the Soviet regime to kill and intimidate Ukrainians. And that is completely false. No Western scholars, even the anti-communist ones, accept the idea that there was a deliberate starvation or a Holodomor. But in Ukraine, it is part of the nationalist mythology. You have to agree that there was a Holodomor. That's what's taught in the schools. And the Ukrainian government, which is ideologically dominated by extreme right-wing Ukrainian nationalists, not only glorify as national heroes those Ukrainian nationalists who sided with the Nazis and who participated in the genocide of the Jews and the mass murder of many Soviet citizens and citizens of other countries like Poland. The Ukrainian government considers these men heroes, and the Ukrainian government simply considers the famine of 1932-33 to be a Holodomor deliberately created and directed against Ukrainians. This is completely false. There's a lot of excellent research that's been done that proves that it's false. But you're never going to convince the Ukrainian government of that, because this is constituent part of right-wing Ukrainian national identity.
Yes, and some false communists in France, actually.
There's a pretty good book. I don't remember the exact title, but there's a pretty good book published by Edition Delga, which is a left-wing publisher in Paris, by Mark Tauger, Tauger. He has, I think, the best research on Soviet and Russian agriculture and famines of any researcher in the world. He spent his entire academic career researching Soviet and Russian agriculture and famines. And some years ago, he published, and he writes in English, of course. He teaches in the United States. But some years ago, Edition Delga published a collection of his scholarly essays. in French, translated them and published them. So that's available. Even if you don't read English, that's okay. You can read Tauger's collection of essays, and you can see the kind of research that he has done that confirms that there was no such thing as any kind of deliberate famine. And he continues to do research on that. I just finished reading one of his latest essays yesterday or the day before. So he continues to do the research on this period. But it's not just a question of Tauger. None of the major researchers, all of whom are anti-communist and anti-Stalin, but none of the major Western researchers believe that there was a Holodomor.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about Trotsky. Here I have new evidence of Trotsky.
Sure.
Great book, actually. And I will ask you, it's for the person who will watch it. So even if I already know your answer, I will ask you these questions. Who was the person who have to succeed to Lenin? Who's the person that was chosen by Lenin?
Well, let's see, a couple of years ago.
You can continue.
Sure. No, I'm just saying that there wasn't any explicit, Lenin did not explicitly pick a successor, but of all of the people who were possible successors, you're really talking about Zinoviev, Trotsky, and Stalin. It seems that Stalin was the closest to Lenin of all of them. So it's not a surprise that Stalin became the leader of the Soviet Union after Lenin's death, but Lenin did not explicitly choose a successor.
Okay. Now we are going to focus.
Okay, but while you're checking your notes, let me just say to your audience here, my book on the fraud of the Testament of Lenin is scheduled to be published by Éditions Delga in French translation sometime in the next couple of months.
Okay.
I don't know exactly when.
I had it in English.
That's the book. Yes, that one is scheduled to be published by Delga within the next few months.
Okay. By the way, it was a pleasure to read it. Stalin had a cult of personality that we call in French. That means that
I know what it means.
Traits, etc., etc. But when Khrushchev came, all the pictures that represent Stalin were put other way. So what do you think about it?
Well, my first book is called Khrushchev Live. Okay, Khrushchev a Monty. And in that book, towards the beginning of the book, I researched the whole business of the cult of personality. And a couple of things about it. It's very clear that Stalin didn't like it. If Stalin had been a dictator, he would have simply said, stop it. But he wasn't a dictator, and the collective leadership did not want to do away with it. Stalin did not agree with it, and there's a lot of evidence that he did, and I have it at that point. Died immediately that Stalin died. There were some meetings of the former Politburo, the top 5 or 6 leaders, where they discussed, what to do after now that Stalin's dead. And I think it was Malenkov, but you can look in my book, who said, well, Comrade Stalin always told us that this cult of personality around himself was bad, that's not consistent with Marxism or Leninism, but we never had courage enough to end it. That was what Malenkov said. So I have that quotation in there too. Khrushchev, of course, lied. That's what my book is called. Khrushchev lied. And in his secret speech, which is made up essentially of nothing but false statements about Stalin, he claimed that Stalin, created and perpetuated this cult of personality around himself. But that is completely wrong. And that was one of the first things that I began to research when I started to research Khrushchev's secret speech, and it ended up being that book called Khrushchev Lied or Khrushchev a menti.
Yes, Stalin was against the cult of personality, like what you said. Yes, and besides, how can you recognize Bourgeois propaganda? How can you identify capitalism between history?
Well, I don't know. That's a big question. Let's just talk about the field that I've been researching, which is the Soviet Union during the Stalin period. And the answer, of course, the general answer too, the answer about other questions is you have to look for evidence. Okay. And when I began to look for the evidence years ago now, I discovered that all of these anti-Stalin horror stories were not backed up by any evidence. There's no evidence to support them. Now, for decades, of course, the primary documents, evidence from the former Soviet archives were not accessible to anybody. So anything that Khrushchev and his people, and then Gorbachev and his people wrote were accepted as the truth in a kind of naive manner. But we now have lots of documentation, and we can prove that they were lying about virtually everything. I have been searching for many years for a genuine crime that Stalin committed. And every now and then, I think I've found one. But when I look at the evidence, it turns out that the evidence does not support the notion that Stalin committed this crime. Six or 7 or 8 years ago, I undertook to research the event known as the Katyn massacre, because I felt, I guessed, that if there were any event, if there were any crime of Stalin that was well documented, it must be the Katyn massacre. And I spent a long time researching all of the evidence of the question of Katyn, and I discovered that the evidence, in fact, points in the opposite direction. That even the Katyn massacre was not committed by the Soviets, like is almost universally accepted. I would say universally accepted. I have been researching, I've been looking for crimes of Stalin for many years. And I may find one of these days. And if I find one, I'm going to write about it. I haven't found any. And I think that's remarkable. That's a testament to how false, how dishonest the portrayal of Stalin, and therefore the portrayal of the world communist movement, the Soviet Union during the period of Stalin's leadership, the portrayal that we have learned. Of course, Trotsky and the Trotskyists continue to lie about it, but the anti-communists continue to lie about it as well. So yes, that's what I've been doing.
In France, it's very difficult to be aware of what's going on in the Soviet Union. That is to say that when we try to correct some points with our teachers, for example, we are regularly criticized.
Ask them for evidence. Ask them what their evidence is. Who cares who said what? Who cares if some supposedly famous scholar made some claim? What's his evidence? I've written 2 books just dedicated to examining the fact claims of famous American scholars. One was this book by Timothy Snyder called Bloodlands, and another was the book by a professor at Princeton University called Stalin Waiting for the Truth. That's Stephen Kotkin. And I wrote 2 whole books about a book about each of those works, showing how in every single case, the fact claims that they make about Stalin's crimes were simply false. Okay, it's in other historical fields, works like those would, but in the field of communist studies, Soviet history, and certainly about Stalin, you get praise for these kinds of dishonest lies. So yes, always ask for the primary source evidence and don't take anybody's word for it.
Thank you for this advice. And maybe I will give some books that you wrote to my teachers. It could help them to understand what happened.
Not all teachers, not all academics. In fact, I would say a great many academics who specialize in Soviet history are not open to learning the truth. Okay, Soviet history from the very beginning, from the time of the revolution, has mainly been a field that generates anti-communist propaganda and has only been secondarily interested in discovering what was really happening. So a lot of people who chose Soviet history as their specialty did so because they were already committed anti-communists and anti-Stalinists, and they are simply not open to the truth. So don't be surprised if that is the case with your professors. I don't know your professors, but if it's the case with them, I would not be surprised.
I presume that I'm in high school, so
yes.
This is.
Well, high school teachers, yeah. I mean, if you're a high school teacher, you don't do research yourself. You read the works of others. Okay, you read the works, and that means that you are really at the mercy. You're really of these other researchers, and if they are lying, you have no way of knowing that they're lying. So yeah, you should discuss that with them, that there's no evidence of any of these crimes.
Tell me a little about your countries, about the United States, because is it difficult to defend these ideas in a country that is anti-communist?
Oh yeah, it's impossible. Okay, I mean, when I was in Paris, I was in Paris years ago. I gave a talk at a street, at a bookstore on a street that was named after a communist who was in the resistance and was shot by the Nazis. Okay, I don't remember the name of the street, but the things I mentioned at my talk is this could never happen in the United States. Okay, it could not ever be the case that a street was named after somebody who had been a communist. The United States is like the world's capital of anti-communism, and there are some honest people in the field of Soviet history in the United States and elsewhere, but in the United States, they don't say that. Okay, they are careful not to make any statements that could possibly be interpreted as being favorable to Stalin, because you can't have a career in the field of Soviet history if you make statements, unless you are anti-Stalin, or unless you avoid the subject altogether. That's it. Okay. Yeah, in France, there was a very large communist movement. And then, of course, there was the resistance movement, led largely by the Communist Party during World War II. There was nothing like that in the United States. There was a Communist Party, there was a Communist movement, but it was much, much smaller and had much, much less influence.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yes,
I hope these remarks are helpful to you.
Yes, people in France are really open-minded. It had problems defending these ideas?
I am not in the field. I don't teach history. I don't teach Soviet studies. I could not, if I taught Soviet studies, I couldn't do this research. Because I couldn't know. I mean, most people don't know about my research. I get a certain, it's relatively minimal. You know, I've been kicked off some websites, and my Wikipedia page has been vandalized. Really petty stuff like that. But other than that, no. But I'm not really writing for the academic community. I'm writing for people like you. Okay? I'm writing for people like you, because there are people like you who are really interested in the truth about the history of the Soviet Union, so that they can learn from the successes and also from the errors of the Soviet Union, so that they can, try to do better the next time. And over the years, I have, been lucky that a number of people like yourself and your colleagues have contacted me. And that's my audience. You're my audience. I'm not writing for the academic field. I know some people in that field, but I'm not writing for them. I'm not writing for the academic field of Soviet studies, which is a corrupt field. Okay?
Okay. So this is the end of the interview.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, for your patience and for your answers. I remind that our subscribers who can read all of your books, and I hope that most French people will discover you.
A number of my books have been published by Zhang.
Yes. Good evening.
Au revoir.
Победы станут новые бойцы.